and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. China accuses the US of economic bullying and destabilizing the world's economies as Wall Street reverses earlier gains after the White House says additional taxes on China will come into effect tomorrow. The US and Iran confirm nuclear talks will take place in Oman this weekend. And Prince Harry arrives at the Court of Appeal in London as he challenges his right for taxpayer protection. Now to our top story. And President Trump has responded to China's accusations of economic bullying. Writing on Truth Social, the US president said China wants to make a deal badly, but they don't know how to get started. And the White House has said additional taxes on China will come into effect tomorrow. In the last couple of hours, US stock markets have turned negative despite opening higher this morning. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm pleased to say I'm joined by Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Gulf Business Insight and senior presenter at Al Arabiya News, Rawia Alami. So, Shane, I just wanted to start with you first of all. So, let's get into this tariff chat that we have. China's accusing the US of economic bullying and they vowed to fight until the very end. We just heard that. But we know these additional US levies on China are going to come into effect tonight, tomorrow, whichever time zone you're in. Is this rhetoric concerning coming out of both countries?
Well, I wouldn't really use the word rhetoric because I think it's fair enough of Beijing to use the word economic bullying, because I think that's a fair comment of what is coming from Washington, because it's a fight that Beijing didn't really start with. But they've used words like seriously infringing on the interests of countries around the world, which again I would agree with. And they're saying that it strongly deplores and they firmly oppose it. They do say that which I think the wording at the start was quite reserved, but I think, that was earlier this morning when we first chatted, but now they're saying that they're going to fight to the end. So that kind of shows that, they're not going to just take whatever Washington and Trump throws at it, which I think is fair. And I think they have every right to defend their interests. And I think now it's back in Trump's court. So I'd be interested to see where Beijing then takes it and whether they're going to retaliate. But I think rhetoric is a bit strong. I think it's a fair, but it's not really surprising, their reaction.
Rawia, I don't know what you make of those comments and what Shane's saying, but we also heard from the White House, Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, did give one of her press briefings. She always comes out swinging, doesn't she? And she said just so many countries are calling up the US. They want to make a deal. They want to negotiate. Where do we go from here?
I'm not surprised, to be honest, Leigh Ann. The press secretary of the White House said that over 70 countries have already contacted the White House. She actually describes that, or says that the phones are ringing off the hook in the White House, trying to negotiate with Washington, maybe to do any bilateral trade deals. I'm not surprised about this, to be honest, but I don't think China is going to be making any calls to the White House anytime soon. I agree with Shane that it is fair. It's a fair comment from China to say that they will not succumb to the American bullying, as they call it, and I do believe that they will fight it till the end.
So earlier, actually, I spoke to Ruby Osman, policy advisor and China expert at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. Here is what she said about what China might do next. It's quite interesting. Take a listen.
I think China's going to have to fight it on two fronts. And so we've already seen some countermeasures proposed. And interestingly, they go beyond the realm of tariffs into things like fentanyl cooperation, into things like IP, even into potentially banning US films in China. But I also think the other key area of focus for China it's going to be the rest of the world. And I think 54% tariffs on China were not a surprise. This is similar to what President Trump was threatening on the campaign trail. What is a surprise is quite how high tariffs are on the rest of the world. Trump thinks China is the main offender when it comes to trade imbalances, but actually he's also put very high tariffs on some of those countries like Vietnam, like Japan, that the US has traditionally seen as counterweights to China's influence. And so I think for China, another priority will be making sure that it builds common ground with those countries and that those countries aren't pressured into potentially curbing their ties with China in exchange for concessions from the US on tariff rates.
Rawia, China is really the only nation at the moment that we're seeing come out retaliating against Trump's tariffs. I think the world right now is kind of watching what the European Union is going to do and how their stance is going to come across. What are the main concerns that we heard from Ursula von der Leyen today, the European Commissioner?
Well, I mean, Europe has to think about its stand and to decide whether they need to retaliate or negotiate with the US. The problem with Europe is that it has many problems, actually. First of all, it's fragmented. For example, the French attitude towards Trump's tariffs is completely different than the Hungarian for example, reaction or attitude towards them. We're talking about also an economy, a European economy, which is exhausted because of the Ukrainian war, and they have challenges as well. They need to militarize Europe, especially if the US decides to move out of NATO, and therefore they have also more debts. I don't think we can compare China to Europe in this instance in terms of facing these tariffs. I think China's position economically is stronger than the European position, and therefore I think, China is definitely going to be in a better position to stand up to Trump's tariffs.
So Shane, do you think Trump has underestimated China? Do you think China have other plans already and they are looking at different places to move their trade? They're one step ahead here.
Yeah, no, I agree what you said, that China's in a better position than the EU, but I looked at some of the figures and China's not in a better position at the moment than it was in the Trump administration the last time. But also I looked at the figures as well, and in terms of, there's about 300 billion deficit in terms of trade from the US side. But also when you look at what are the proportion of exports that went to the US, it was about sort of like 20% back in the last administration, and now it's down to 12. So I think China's reliance on the US is reduced at the same time that its economy is not performing as well. So I think that's going to benefit Beijing because it's looking at other markets. It's looking at our backyard here in the Middle East. So I think the Middle East could benefit from China looking even more away from the US and looking towards other regions to get trade deals, trade investment. The Belt and Road, for example, has been a huge benefit for this region. So I think, China will start looking at other potential partners, which is great for where we're sitting right now.
I think, Shane, also that China has already diversified its trade for years now. I think they've seen this coming from Trump's first term, and therefore their reliance on trade with the US is much, much less than probably many other countries. But the thing is, I mean, if we look at China and the EU, if they stand as a united front, in terms that they've decided to do the same thing, which is retaliate rather than negotiate. I think maybe that will make China's position better. Yet if you take the opposite scenario, where the European Union decides to negotiate with the US, I don't think that's going to make China's position any worse in this situation.
It's a difficult one right now, isn't it, for China and I think for the US, because where does it really go from here? No one really has a crystal ball. What do you think? Well,
I think we were talking about it might bring the EU and China together because they have a sort of common enemy in the US. But then if you look at what I said earlier, China will look to other markets, but then we've always been talking about, other markets worrying about cheap Chinese goods flooding their markets. When that starts happening in Europe, then that sort of cozy, EU-China relationship may suddenly get a bit frostier, because if the EU, as you said, is not doing particularly well, they're not going to want loads of Chinese goods flooding into Europe or Turkey or, other parts of the region. And we've already seen issues for example, like in Turkey, where there's issues over that. So I think it's not going to be just Trump. He's going to be the catalyst to start a sort of, I think, protectionist attitude across the world. And you know, this is the first domino to go, maybe China, but then where else is it going to fall, so to speak?
That we might even experience or see tariffs that other countries put on Chinese imports as well.
Exactly.
Just
so
like the US.
You know, they might, you know, the Trumpian sort of tariff policy may, you know, sort of mushroom around the world.
Spread.
Exactly.
But the thing is,
worrying.
but we've seen China in the past also bypassing these tariffs, these American tariffs, specifically through secondary markets, basically. That, you know, they ship to other countries and then they rebrand their products, and these Chinese products end up in American markets. Now, I don't know with these sweeping tariffs if they're going to crack down on such backdoors to the US for any goods, let alone the Chinese.
I think they probably are. I was looking at specifically the diamond market, where they were looking at, you know, India was doing that a bit, where it was shipping diamonds to other countries and then into the US, and they have said that they're going to look at where the original item came from. So I think that is, you know, some sort of smart intelligentness that has been built into the Trumpian tariff. If you can believe that. But yeah, it's interesting where it's going to go, and that is what I'm worried about. It's not going to be just, you know, America versus the world. It's that, you know, a lot of the other sort of similar attituded leaders around the world will think, well, if Trump's getting that, then we're going to start doing it. And, you know, it's a bargaining chip that all of these leaders can use to get what they want from another country or a neighbor, that they can go, oh, well, let's use tariffs. So that's what my more worry is about, is that this will
set a precedent in the world.
Or it will just continue a ripple effect. And as we know, trade is so interlinked. You know, globalization has been so big. Is this really going to be the precipice of change?
That is a good question, or that's a really good point, Leigh Ann, because the real question is, will the American consumer be able to bear the brunt of the increased prices because of these tariffs?
Well,
because they're going to feel it at home. We're talking about car prices, grocery shopping price, basically bills are going to go up. We're talking about power and energy as well. We're talking about houses because there are tariffs now on Canadian lumber. So therefore, the American consumer is going to feel it very much on his daily bills, basically. Will he be able to, or the American consumer will be able to withhold or withstand this pressure compared to the Chinese consumer?
Well, I think this is a question that I've been asking a lot of Republican analysts that we've had on and people who work for the party. And they said that this might actually come to the fore when the midterms happen. You know, Trump has said it's a medicine, you've got to drink it. Sometimes you're sick. But how long can people swallow this bitter pill for? And I think that might be where the midterms probably lead us to. But we'll definitely get back to more of this in a moment. But thank you so much for clarifying that. We're just going to have a look at some other news, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Ukrainian Prime Minister Volodymyr Zelensky says 2 Chinese soldiers have been captured whilst fighting in eastern Ukraine. China has been accused of assisting Russia in the war against Ukraine. Zelensky says he has ordered an explanation from Beijing. South Korea will head to the polls on the 3rd of June for a snap presidential election triggered by the removal of impeached leader Yoon Suk-yeol. Leading contenders have started to throw their hats into the ring today. Opposition leader Lee Jae-myung is the current frontrunner in the polls. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister has actually arrived in the US to meet with government officials. The trip comes ahead of President Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia later in spring. Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud is expected to discuss Gaza and the Houthis. And a newborn baby has become the first child in the UK to be born via a donated womb. The infant's mum received her sister's womb in a pioneering operation in 2023. The miracle child, named Amy after her aunt, was born to London mum Grace Davison and weighed just over 2 kilos. Now on to our next story. Iran has confirmed it will hold talks with the US over its nuclear program following President Trump's White House announcement. The Iranian foreign minister took to social media to say the indirect talks will take place in Oman on Saturday between himself and US envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. So, Shane, more on Donald Trump, a different segue here. It's on Iran and what he said about that. So Donald Trump announced yesterday that the US and Iran were going to be holding direct talks. However, Iran's foreign minister has pretty much contradicted that. He came out on social media saying they're indirect talks. What's going on?
Well, yeah, I said before I didn't think when it came to the tariffs that this wasn't really rhetoric, and it was concerning and it wasn't surprising. This is definitely, there's a lot of rhetoric in the Iranian story, and it's kind of a bit like, with Trump, China might be taking over as the baddie in his sort of story that he wants, narrative, as you would say. But so Iran, I think, is probably going to move up in sort of the rankings as the baddie in sort of the White House. But there's a lot of rhetoric I was reading the Reuters story, and they were talking about how, is this direct, is it indirect? And it's not really a good sign if you can't even decide whether it's direct or indirect before you even start talking. And
yeah.
For example, like to give you some other information, there was a Reuters sort of unnamed Iranian diplomat said that we need to lift some of the sanctions and we need to unfree some money to, as a sort of carrot to start the talks. But then at the same time, the US Energy Secretary said, well, if there's not going to be talks, then there's going to be tighter sanctions. So it's not surprising that no one's really optimistic about this. And I kind of think, yes, it's very, very good that you've got talks, but if you can't even agree what type of talks they are, then it's not a great start.
Rawia, not a great start if you can't agree. At least they've agreed a location, so they haven't agreed.
Well,
That's.
I think what's important that they're talking.
Yeah.
Direct talks or indirect talks. I think what's really, really important is that they're talking. I think the climate, or at least Iran, it's in Iran's interest to have these talks, and I think it's willing to have. It's open to having them, whether direct or indirect, at this moment, because it really does need sanctions to be lifted for the economy to flourish, or to for Iran. And at the same time, we are talking about, basically, I think what's really promising is Oman being a part of it, because Oman was the mediator of the last nuclear deal in 2015, which Trump pulled out of in 2018. And Oman is known in the region as being the mediator, the one that has very reasonable stands on even regional issues that sort of create a debate, and that they're controversial in the region. Oman has always held this kind of impartial stance, and therefore it is the best mediator, the best country to do this job.
So
positive. I think that's promising and positive.
Yeah, that's promising. So we've got Oman as the location, but like we were just saying, the relationship has deteriorated significantly if you have a look at Iran and the US. I'm just wondering, do you think the US thinks is now the right time for these talks? Because we know Iran has economically been going through its own strife. And also, if we look at Hezbollah and we look at the Houthis, they've also been weakened. So is this the right time for both places to meet?
Well, I think, I agree exactly what you said. Talking is always very good. So I think that's commendable, and they should continue to talk. But you're right what you said about Iran as well and their economy, because obviously oil went down with the stock market on the back of what we spoke about previously and the tariffs. And oil is central to the Iranian economy, so that's going to directly affect them. So it's kind of like Trump is kind of getting them in two different ways. But I think it is good that they talk, but I was speculating when I was on the way here in the car, and I was thinking that Trump is known for, the Arabian Accords and, creating peace in his last term. So I kind of think he would prefer to be, sitting in the White House, having these people shake hands. So I think, peace with Iran would be like the an ultimate goal.
Would that be his Nobel Peace Prize winning moment? Do you think that's what he's looking for?
I bet he would like a prize, I would say.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I think he has more chance of getting the Nobel Peace Prize because of making peace with Iran rather than solving the Palestinian-Israeli issue.
Wow,
I think he has more chances.
That's so interesting, because I think this is what Trump is really pushing for, isn't it? He's pushing for talks, he's pushing for ceasefires, he's pushing for peace. And we see this, maybe he doesn't always do it in the right style, but it seems to be where he's moving towards.
Or maybe he doesn't always do it to the end. Like we've seen some progress at the beginning of Trump's term when he appointed the super special envoy, his super special envoy, Steve Witkoff. There was some progress. There was a ceasefire deal in Gaza, but that sort of, fell to the ground soon after. We've also seen some progress in talking to the Russians, trying to stop or, put an end to the Ukrainian war, yet at the same time that also has not materialized in any way. So he's greatest at starting things and getting things started, but not necessarily finishing them, especially because he aims to finish everything at sort of light speed. And that's not possible.
It doesn't always happen that way. Yeah. But it is interesting when we're in the notes about sort of Russia and Iran have kind of gotten friendly as well. And if you believe what you read in the media, and I generally do, if Putin and Trump are kind of friendly, then maybe there's a way in for Putin to mediate between Iran and the US. But then you've got Ukraine sort of complicating everything. So I think that there's a lot in the mix, and I think Trump's inbox is just getting bigger and bigger, and what's going to take the precedent and priority really.
And his phone's ringing and ringing, isn't it? Because everyone's calling him about the tariffs. But I think that is an interesting point when you talk about the relationship between Iran and Russia. That might possibly open the door up to even more talks. That's something I hadn't really thought about before, and I'm not sure what.
One thing is,
well, maybe Putin could then get the Nobel Peace Prize if he gets Iran and US to shake hands.
Can I tell you what?
In Moscow, that'd be interesting.
With Trump together,
that would be one of that would be something I never thought I would see.
Well, it is strange times, actually.
Yeah.
We are witnessing things we never thought could happen, and they are happening. One thing is for sure when it comes to Iran, I don't think it is in anyone's interest for this issue to turn into a war. I think that would be disastrous for everybody involved. I mean, least of all that, Iran can cause damage, regardless of whether Trump thinks that, he managed Iran's arms have been deeply weakened, like the Houthis and Hezbollah. But Iran in itself is still capable of fighting. And it's, the least thing it's capable of is disrupting trade, by targeting ships, continuing to target ships, or even target them more now in the Red Sea.
Yeah, we obviously see the Iranian proxies, the Houthis, have launched those.
And they can do it directly as well.
And they can do it directly. Yeah. But let's hold that thought. We're going to have a look at a bit of the sports and business news that we're seeing today, and then we'll be back with more from you. So let's take a look at the top business news. Clothing retailers across the US are delaying orders and have a freeze on hiring after tariff hikes affected products imported from Vietnam and China. Businesses like Nike and Lululemon face offsetting the cost of tariffs by rising prices by 40%, potentially damaging sales, or absorb the cost increase and further strain already thin profit margins. Gold surged to a high of over $3,166 per troy ounce. That was last week. Analysts have drawn comparisons with the last political and economic turmoil, which were the main drivers of record prices back in 1980. But market players say the nature of this rally looks more sustainable as big powers look unlikely to resolve issues like tariffs, which has driven interest in gold as a safe haven from risk. Turning to all the sports news now, and defending champion Scotty Scheffler is the man to beat at this week's Masters, where Rory McIlroy is making his 11th and perhaps best shot at completing the career Grand Slam. Much of the excitement ahead of this year's tournament does revolve around the two best players in the world. The opening round is scheduled to begin on Thursday at Augusta. And former Australian batter Will Pucovski has retired from cricket at the age of 27, saying he doesn't want to risk doing any more damage to his brain after repeated concussions. He made one Test appearance, scoring 62 against India in Sydney in 2021. He has suffered 12 known concussions during his career and last played competitively in March 2024. Now, Prince Harry was back in court in London today, appealing a decision which downgraded his security in the UK. The Duke of Sussex stepped back as a working royal in 2020, affecting his taxpayer-funded protection. The hearing at the Court of Appeal is expected to last 2 days. Sarah Firth has the latest.
Prince Harry stepping out of his car and back into the UK spotlight today, as he arrives at the Royal Courts of Justice. A tense smile and brief wave as he dodges the inevitable questions.
Are you going to visit your dad, Harry? Harry, are you going to go and see the King? Are you going to speak to your dad?
King Charles's younger son, back home and back in court. This time he's appealing a decision made in 2020 that he would not automatically receive personal police security whilst in Britain. That decision came after the Prince and wife Meghan split with the royal family and left the UK. They're now settled in California and have founded a charitable foundation, amongst other endeavours. Since relocating to North America, Prince Harry's visits back home have been few and far between. Court appearances as the Prince takes on the British tabloids in separate legal battles about privacy and information gathering. And Harry and his wife Meghan returned upon the death of his grandmother, the Queen. Today marking another sombre return, with the Prince back in court as this 2-day hearing gets underway. Sarah Firth, Arabian News.
So we've been having a chat in here and can overhear a few little words, but let's get to Shane. Shane, this story will no doubt spark so much debate. What do you think? Should Harry still get full royal security measures? But he's not even a working royal.
Well, quick answer, no. That's straight out no. I think, he decided to leave the royal family. And he didn't want any of the perks. He didn't want the castles, the palace, or anything like that. So tough luck. You don't get the perks. You don't get to keep the perks as well. That's like when you quit a job, you don't get to keep the salary. So I'm sorry, no, he doesn't.
That's a bit harsh.
It's harsh, but I am harsh today, and it's just the way it is. Absolutely no.
Absolutely nothing. So
Absolutely
no castle.
Nothing.
He does. I don't even think.
No.
Nothing.
He can use some of his, I won't name the name, but he could use some of his streamer 100 million.
Oh, yes. Other streamers are available. But I feel like that's sort of taken me by surprise. I don't know why.
He's very harsh today.
Yeah, that's quite... Listen, no matter what he's done, right, Rawia, we know he hasn't always been the most popular in the UK, and that's since, was it Megxit happened, or whatever it was called?
I like how it's called.
Yeah, but do you not think he deserves some security?
I think he does. I think he does. I mean, after all, he's still a royal. He's British, and his children are British and they have a heritage and they have a right to come back to their country safely. Now he's saying that he doesn't come back to the UK often because he doesn't even have a residence there. Yet I think that he says that this is the reason why he's not coming back to the UK, and I think he deserves to be able to do so safely. And I don't think it's outrageous for,
I think he can.
The British police to pay for it.
I think, I don't think the British police should pay for it. They should use that money to look after, citizens who actually live in the country and pay tax. So I think they have a stretched budget. The UK economy is not that great, and with the tariffs and everything going on to them, and we just spoke about earlier. So I think definitely 100% no, he should not be getting any money. He has plenty of money that he can use in his own security. Every other celebrity that comes there, they pay for their own security. So he can just his wife can just sell more jam.
OK, so the wife can sell more jam. I don't know how popular. Apparently, it's quite runny, that jam. I haven't tasted it,
not
but
very popular.
I read it somewhere. But, I just wanted to say that the hearing is expected to last 2 days. It's obviously an appeal because they formally said that he wouldn't be able to have security. It's on a case-by-case basis. But do you think the court will maybe be a little bit more lenient? As you say, he's got a family, he's got children. We know, that he has links to the UK.
Actually, we were talking off before the show, and Shane, you were mentioning that there was a precedent. Remember, with
yes.
I can't remember the name of
Wallace Simpson.
Yes, the Wallace Simpson
and
case.
the Duke of Windsor. They lived in the Bahamas and Paris. If anyone remembers that show called The Crown, it was in a lot of it.
So
they when he did abdicate, I think it was Edward the Eighth, but don't quote me on that. They did get money from his brother, who was the king, I think George VI, maybe.
Yes.
So there is precedent that they do get money, but I think that precedent means that it shouldn't come from the British police and the British government.
Where should it come from, though?
Prince Charles should just pay for his security.
Out of the Duchy of Lancaster, is it?
Cornwall or something.
Oh, no, I don't know, but if you know, please
it doesn't matter
message
where
in
it's
and tell
coming
us.
from, as long as
Exactly. Prince Charles should just, not Prince Charles, it's King Charles now.
King Charles,
yes.
I was just thinking.
He should just pay for his security. And then if he doesn't want to do that, then that says a lot about the relationship, which is another day's work, really.
Which is strained already.
Which is not surprising, it's strained. If my brother said that, what Harry said about his family, then we wouldn't be talking either, and I wouldn't be paying for his security.
Oh my God, you're so harsh.
I am, yeah.
You're so harsh.
I must say something, I feel like maybe if we put ourselves in Harry's shoes a little bit, he did feel that he wasn't having the right security when Meghan joined him and they got married in 2016 in the UK. He said it was quite frightening. And obviously Princess Diana was hounded by the press. So I wonder if in some way we're kind of forgetting that Harry has been through something quite traumatic. Meghan, he felt, was at risk. So is
and he feared that, something similar might happen to her as what happened to his mother. I honestly think that the court should rule in his favor. Now, whether the money comes out of the British police or a different government entity or King Charles himself, I don't think it matters. But I think I believe that he has the right to protection and to come back to the UK safely and.
Still shaking your head.
No, yeah, I'm sorry.
Shane's still shaking his head.
He's stubborn on that.
It's probably because I'm Irish, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Most probably.
I was going to say just one other thing. We just touched on King Charles there, and when we saw Harry walking into the court today, people were shouting at him, the press, like, have you seen your dad? Have you spoken to your dad? And people seem to really want to know what's happening in that relationship. We obviously know King Charles has been suffering his own health problems. It is disappointing, isn't it, for the royal family that this rift has become so public?
Well, yeah, but I can also see it from their point of view, because every time they probably have a conversation with him, he's going to use it for his next book or his next TV series or his next interview. So, again, there's massive trust issues there, which I can completely get. I think he's sort of made his bed and he has to sleep in it now. So.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it, when it comes to families? We all know how
it is.
complicated
It's sad to
they
be.
are.
It's really unfortunate.
And as my mum says, you can't always choose your family.
No, you can't.
No. We're gonna
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And finally, I actually want to go to some quirky stories that you guys have come up with, which I absolutely love. It's the time in the show when we look at something a little bit more fun to end with. And talk to me a little about recession pop songs, Shane, because I must admit something. When I was looking through these, I saw Teenage Dream by Katy Perry, and I still feel like that's one of the life markers for me. I remember exactly where I was and what I was doing and how troublesome I was when that song came out.
So it's basically, I picked this particular article because, like I said a few seconds ago, I'm Irish, and I always remember they said in Ireland when we had like economic troubles, that was when you got the best music. You know, you got sort of like the Sinead O'Connors, and then when we had the Celtic Tiger, we had the Louis Walsh era, which it's debatable how quality of that. So recession pop is basically when you're in sort of difficult economic times, you get really good sort of poppy music. You get pop comes to the fore because people want escapism. They don't want to be sort of hearing too much about sort of Trump and tariffs. Or
I'm sure they're not going to write songs about Trump's tariffs.
Well, one of the big ones before was "Party in the USA" by Miley Cyrus, so that could still be hopefully relevant today. This was an academic study, so it's not just me making this up off the top of my head. There's somebody who's called a musicologist, which sounds like a fantastic job at the University of Chicago. And I looked at some of the songs that were came from the previous recessions. There was Blondie, there was Bryan Adams, again debatable, I would say. Sinead O'Connor, I would say, is great. And then the last great recession, they called it, was 27, 29. I don't know, were we calling it the Great Recession then? I don't know. I wouldn't anyway. It was Beyonce and Flo Rida, you said earlier, was another favourite of yours. So I'm kind of interested to see what really good pop stars come out of the Trumpian recession.
I can't wait to see that either. But also some of these pop stars that we spoke about, like, who have come out, there's Kesha, she was in the sort of 2008 recession, and
Black Eyed Peas.
Black Eyed Peas. And Katy Perry too. A lot of them, and Lady Gaga, I don't know where I'm getting this information from, but I think they all bringing out albums again. I know because, obviously I downloaded them and pre-ordered them and couldn't wait for it to all happen. But they have a real escapism about these, don't they? You can kind of switch off from reality. Do you think that's why they're so popular?
I think so, yes. I think so. As I said, people don't want to hear, when they're hearing about tariffs, all over the news. Everybody's talking about it for days now, or even weeks. And probably we're going to hear about it for weeks, if not months to come. I'm sure they don't want to hear about such things in music as well.
No, I think they make loads of memes now, don't they? About how often people say tariffs.
I don't think Katy Perry's latest album did well, but I think that was more to do with the songs rather than this theory. I'd like to see like brand new artists coming to the fore and see who they're, in 4 years' time when we're looking at whoever's in the White House, we go, oh, do you remember that last tariff recession?
I wonder if Taylor Swift is going to release any singles or albums soon.
got the last one, didn't we? That made the Eras tour, and that just made an absolute fortune. So we'll wait for her. I will say one thing: Katy Perry had this song called "Lifetimes" on her new album, and I thought it was absolutely
I did like that one. That was
a
pretty
good one.
That was a good one.
Yeah. And Rawia, your story actually involves a lot of unusual discoveries.
Yes.
But this is in UK rivers. What more?
Absolutely. We're talking about a river in Wrexham. Apparently, litter pickers have tried to clean the river, and they found all sorts of very strange things dumped in the river. We're talking about mattresses, we're talking about washing machine drums, we're talking about scooters, traffic cones, all sorts of things. I mean, it's obvious that the locals have decided to use the river as a massive trash can. But on a more serious note, I think it is quite difficult to get rid of your trash, your old furniture, the big items that you want to get rid of and dispose of. In certain countries, it's quite challenging, and you actually need to pay money to do this.
So you're telling me you would throw them into the river if you could?
Well, I mean, I've had trouble in this country getting rid of old furniture, and I honestly had to pay money to certain companies to come so that they can take it and dispose of it. Now, I wouldn't say if there was a river running next to my house, what would I do if I would throw my old mattress or old bed in it? Probably not. But I mean, it is quite difficult, to be honest with you.
And Shane, but it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because this is in Wrexham, which is, of course, in Wales. And we do know that if you start, especially in the likes of COVID, and if you start really cleaning up the waterways, it can be amazing for wildlife and rewilding.
Oh, yeah, like I mean, we all saw that. I think, didn't you say earlier there was dolphins. In Venice, I think it was, and there was otters that came back. But I'm surprised, you know, I've seen so much stuff in the British media about, you know, everyone's in recession. So the fact that people are throwing this stuff out into rivers and not like keeping it,
but we don't know how long
they've
been in the river. Also, it could have been years.
Oh, okay. Well, that is kind of even more worrying that it's managed to stay there
Honestly,
for years.
It could have been years.
It could have been years. Yeah. But it is so interesting because...
Sounds like a TV show could be made out of that.
Yeah. Whose washing machine did this belong to?
Yeah, exactly. What was one? Bargains in the attic, trash in the river.
Yeah, bargains in the river.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll all have to go and find some treasure, won't we, in the canals one day.
Or we go fishing.
Yeah,
we go fishing with magnets.
They've got magnets on them, so it pulls it up.
Yeah, maybe put tariffs on rubbish.
Throw them in the river.
Yeah, there we are. Thank you so much for both joining me
Thank you for having
us. Those quirky stories. That was great. Thank you so much. Shane McGinley, news editor at Arabian Golf Business Insight and senior presenter at Arabiya News, Rawia Alami. Here's a reminder of our top stories. China accuses the US of economic bullying and destabilizing the world's economies as Wall Street reverses earlier gains after the White House says additional taxes on China will come into effect tomorrow. The US and Iran confirm nuclear talks will take place in Oman this weekend. And Prince Harry arrives at the Court of Appeal in London as he challenges his right for taxpayer protection. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. GNT with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next, followed by The Dressing Room. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.